They told Anthony Ray Hinton that no jury in Alabama would ever believe a black man over a white prosecutor holding a revolver. They told him that on a Thursday afternoon in 1985, in a small interrogation room outside Birmingham, while his hands were still cuffed to the metal ring on the table. The detective leaned in close. He smelled like old coffee and cheap cologne, and he said it almost like he was doing Hinton a favor. He said, "Son, I don't care if you did it or you didn't do it. There's 5 reasons you're going down for this. You're black. You're going to have a white prosecutor. You're going to have a white judge. You're going to have an all-white jury. And you got a public defender who couldn't find his own backside with both hands, so you might as well save us all some time." Anthony Ray Hinton was 29 years old. He had never been arrested for anything in his life. His mother, Beulah Hinton, was a 63-year-old woman who lived in a small clapboard house in Praco, Alabama, a coal town that had basically died when the mines closed. Her son still lived with her. He worked night shifts at a warehouse, came home, ate her cooking, and slept. That was his crime. That was the entire shape of his life. The case against him was built on one piece of evidence. One, a .38 caliber revolver that had belonged to his mother for years. It sat in a closet wrapped in an old pillowcase. The state's experts said that gun matched the bullets used in 2 restaurant murders. 2 managers, gunned down weeks apart in suburban Birmingham. There were no eyewitnesses to those killings, no fingerprints. No motive connecting Anthony Ray Hinton to either victim. Just the gun, just his mother's old gun, and the word of a state ballistics examiner. The lawyer the court gave him was named Sheldon Perhacs. Perhacs took the case for the state-mandated maximum of $1,000. He was not a death penalty lawyer. He had never tried a capital case. When Hinton's mother begged him to hire a real ballistics expert to test the gun, Perhacs went to court and asked for funding. The judge gave him $500. The lawyer took that $500 and hired a man who was legally blind in one eye, who had no formal training in firearms, and who, in court, when asked to identify exhibits, said, and I quote, "I cannot see them, Your Honor." That was the defense. A blind man squinting at a revolver. The jury convicted in less than 2 hours. The judge sentenced Anthony Ray Hinton to die. He was 29 years old. He walked into death row at Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama on December 17, 1986. He would not walk out for another 28 years and 4 months. Listen to me carefully. Death row at Holman in those years was a 5-foot by 7-foot cell. Concrete floor, a steel bunk, a steel toilet, a small window the size of a textbook slit horizontally near the top that let in a thin band of Alabama sun for about 40 minutes a day. There was no air conditioning. In July, the metal walls would heat up until you could not lean against them without burning your skin. In January, your breath would fog in the cell. The men around him were the men awaiting the chamber. Yellow Mama, they called it. The state's electric chair. Blackwell sat with Hinton years later in a Birmingham diner, and Hinton told him the worst part was not the heat or the cold or the food that tasted like wet cardboard. The worst part, he said, was the rhythm of execution nights. Every time the state of Alabama scheduled a date, the men on death row knew it 3 weeks in advance. The condemned man would be moved to the death cell, 15 feet from the chamber. The other men, including Hinton, would smell the food they cooked him. Steak, catfish, whatever he asked for. They would hear his footsteps when he was taken to the visiting room to say goodbye to his mother. And then, on the night, around midnight, every single light in the cell block would dim and surge. Dim and surge. That was the chair drawing power. That was the only sound, the dimming of the lights. Hinton said you could feel it in your teeth. He counted 54 men who walked past his cell to the chamber. 54. Each one took a piece of him with them. For the first 3 years, he did not speak, not to guards, not to other prisoners, not to himself. He turned the key in his own jaw and locked it. He thought if he opened his mouth, he would scream, and he would never stop. Then one night, in the 3rd year, he heard a man 2 cells down, crying. The man was scheduled to be put to death the next morning. He was crying for his mother, and Anthony Ray Hinton remembered his own mother in that little house in Praco, alone, every night, writing him letters in pencil because the prison would not let her use a pen. And he opened his mouth, and he said, "Are you okay over there?" And the man said, "No." And Hinton said, "Neither am I. Let's not be okay together." That's how he survived. He started a book club on death row. A book club on death row. He convinced the warden that he and the other condemned men should be allowed to read books once a month and discuss them. The warden, against everything he believed in, said yes. They read To Kill a Mockingbird. They read Beloved. They read James Baldwin. Once they read Harper Lee, and Hinton wrote her a letter from his cell. And she wrote back. He kept that letter folded in his Bible for the next 20 years. In 1999, a lawyer named Brian Stevenson came to see him. Stevenson ran a small organization in Montgomery called the Equal Justice Initiative. He had been combing through Alabama death row cases, looking for the kind of injustice that hides in plain sight. When he opened the Hinton file, he could not believe what he was reading. He could not believe that a man had been condemned on the testimony of a half-blind expert. He could not believe the gun had never been retested by a competent professional. So he hired 3 of the top firearms examiners in the United States and sent them the bullets and the revolver. All 3 came back with the same finding. The bullets did not match the gun. They were not even fired by a similar weapon. The state's case was built on a piece of evidence that, when examined by anyone with 2 working eyes and actual training, was not evidence at all. Brian Stevenson took those reports to the Alabama courts. The Alabama courts shrugged. The state attorney general fought him. For 16 years. 16 more years Anthony Ray Hinton sat in that 5x7 cell while the state of Alabama, holding the proof of his innocence in its hands, refused to act. Stevenson appealed. Stevenson lost. Stevenson appealed again. Stevenson lost again. Until finally he reached the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in February of 2014, did something it almost never does. It ruled unanimously, 9-0, that Hinton's original lawyer had been so incompetent that the conviction had to be thrown out. Hinton versus Alabama, 571 U.S. 263. Read it sometime. The opinion is short and the language is brutal. The court basically tells the state of Alabama that giving a death penalty defendant $500 to hire a one-eyed ballistics expert is not a defense. It is a sham. The state still did not release him. The state retried, or pretended to. The new ballistics evidence was so devastating that the prosecutor finally stood up in court on April 2nd, 2015, and dropped all charges. The next morning, April 3rd, 2015, Anthony Ray Hinton walked out of Holman Prison. He was 58 years old. He had been on death row for 28 years and 104 days. He walked through the gates, and the first thing he did was kneel down on the gravel and put both palms flat on the ground. Blackwell asked him later why. Hinton said, "I just needed to feel something that wasn't concrete." His mother had been dead for 13 years. She did not live to see him free. She wrote him letters every single week for the years she was alive, and the prison never let him keep them all, but he kept the ones he could, and after she died, he stopped opening the new ones because the new ones never came. When he got out of Holman, he went to her grave first. He sat on the dirt. He told her he was home. In 2018, Anthony Ray Hinton published a book called The Sun Does Shine. It is, I am telling you right now, one of the most extraordinary documents ever written by a human being. He does not write with hate. He does not write with revenge. He writes with this strange, terrible mercy. At one point in the book he says, "The state of Alabama took my freedom, took my mother, took my 50s, took my hope of a wife and a child. They did not take my soul. I would not give them that. I will not give them that. He gives speeches now. He testifies before Congress. He sits on death row vigils. The state of Alabama paid him approximately $1,700,000 in compensation for 30 years. Do that math in your head. $56,000 per year for 30 years on death row. For a crime that, by the United States Supreme Court's own unanimous ruling, the evidence could not even support. Anthony Ray Hinton thanked the state in his statement on the courthouse steps. He thanked them. He said, "I forgive you, because if I do not forgive you, you still own me, and I am done being owned." Blackwell sat across from him in that Birmingham diner in 2019. Hinton was 63. He had a slow way of stirring his coffee. 3 full circles, then a tap of the spoon on the rim. 3 circles, 1 tap. He told Blackwell that on death row he learned to do everything in patterns, because patterns were the only thing the state could not take from him. 3 circles, 1 tap. Then he picked up his cup, then he set it down. He looked at Blackwell across the Formica table, and he said, "You want to know the truth? The truth is, I am not free yet. Not really. Because somewhere in Alabama right now, in another 5x7 cell, there is another man like me. And until they let him out too, none of us are free." That is Anthony Ray Hinton. That is 1, 5 more to go. Ricky Jackson was 18 years old when he came home from Vietnam. 18. He had enlisted out of a Cleveland high school in 1973, served his tour, and came back in 75 to a city he barely recognized. The steel mills were closing. His old friends had scattered. He moved back in with his mother on the east side of Cleveland and started looking for work. He thought maybe he would go to community college on the GI Bill. He thought maybe he would marry the girl he had been writing to from overseas. He had plans. He had a future. He had everything that an 18-year-old kid coming home from a war is supposed to have. On May 19, 1975, a money order salesman named Harold Franks was attacked outside a corner store in the Cleveland neighborhood of Glenville. Franks was hit, robbed, and killed. The store owner, Anna Robinson, was wounded. The case sat without a suspect for 3 weeks. Cleveland police were under enormous pressure to close it. Then, a 12-year-old boy named Eddie Vernon told a relative that he had seen something. Word got back to detectives. Detectives came to the school. They pulled Eddie Vernon out of his 6th grade classroom, and they put him in the back of an unmarked car. He was 12 years old. He weighed maybe 80 pounds. He was alone with 2 grown men with badges. Eddie Vernon, decades later, in 2014, on the witness stand in a Cuyahoga County courtroom, said this. He said the detectives told him names. They said, "Did you see Ricky? Did you see Ronnie? Did you see Wiley?" They said the names over and over until those were the only names in his head. They drove him around the neighborhood pointing at houses. They told him what time the attack happened. They told him what the attackers wore. They wrote his statement for him on a yellow legal pad and asked him to sign it. He could barely read it. He signed it. That signed statement from a 12-year-old child who had not been anywhere near the corner store that day was the entire case. There was no physical evidence. There were no fingerprints. There was no weapon recovered. There was no motive. Anna Robinson, the actual surviving victim, did not identify Ricky Jackson in any meaningful way. The prosecution put Eddie Vernon on the stand. He was so small, they brought a phone book for him to sit on so the jury could see his face. He recited the names the detectives had given him. The jury convicted in under 3 hours. Ricky Jackson was sentenced to die in the electric chair. He was 19 years old. He almost was put to death. In the early 80s, he was scheduled. The state of Ohio set a date. The chaplain came to his cell. They measured him for the chair. Then there was a paperwork issue, and the date was suspended. His sentence was commuted to life, so he stayed in the cage. Listen to what 39 years means. 39 years means Ricky Jackson went into prison while disco was still on the radio. Walter Cronkite was still on the evening news. Saigon had just fallen. He came out in 2014 into a country with smartphones, with the internet, with a black president, with marriage equality, with TSA security at every airport. He had never seen any of it. He had never made a phone call that did not require a collect operator. He had never used a debit card. He had never sent a text message. He had been frozen at age 19 for 39 years. Inside, he survived by becoming the most disciplined man on his block. He read law books. He filed his own appeals when the courts cut off his lawyers. He wrote letters in beautiful, careful handwriting because, he said, if his words were going to escape the prison, they had better be worth reading. He had 2 friends inside who had been convicted on the same Eddie Vernon testimony, Wiley Bridgman and Ronnie Bridgman, the Bridgman brothers. The 4 of them, Jackson and the Bridgmans, were tied to each other for the rest of their lives by the words of a frightened 12-year-old child. In 2011, a journalist named Kyle Swenson started digging into the case for the Cleveland alternative paper, Cleveland Scene. He found Eddie Vernon, who was now a 48-year-old man, a deacon at a small Pentecostal church on the east side of Cleveland. Vernon had been carrying the weight of what he had done since he was 12 years old. He had tried to recant before. He had told his pastor. He had told his wife. He had even tried to tell prosecutors back in the early 80s, and a Cleveland detective named Eugene Turpay, according to Vernon's later testimony, had told him to keep his mouth shut or he would be charged with perjury and his mother would lose her house. Kyle Swenson published the story. The Ohio Innocence Project picked up the case. They put Eddie Vernon on the stand again in 2014. He was 53 years old. He sat in the witness chair and he wept. He said, "Your Honor, I lied. I have been lying since I was 12. I never saw Ricky Jackson. I never saw Wiley Bridgman. I never saw Ronnie Bridgman. I never saw any of them. I was at home that day. I have been a coward for 40 years and I cannot be a coward any longer." The judge, Richard McMonigal, listened. The prosecutor, in a moment of conscience that almost never happens in these cases, stood up and said the state of Ohio could no longer stand behind the conviction. On November 21st, 2014, Ricky Jackson walked out of the Cuyahoga County Justice Center. He had been inside for 39 years and 176 days. It was, at that moment, the longest wrongful imprisonment in American history. The cameras caught him on the courthouse steps. He was 57 years old. His hair had gone almost completely white. He blinked in the November sunlight and he said, "I am not bitter. I am not angry. I am free." He had told his lawyers he wanted to walk out alone, on his own 2 feet, without help, because for 39 years he had not been allowed to walk anywhere on his own. His mother had died 11 years before his release. She had visited him every month she was physically able. When she got too sick to travel, she wrote letters. The last letter she wrote to him said, "My baby, do not stop believing. The truth has slow legs, but it walks." He kept that letter inside a Bible. The Bible came home with him. Blackwell met Ricky Jackson in 2016, 2 years after his release, at a small coffee shop in Cleveland. Jackson was working then for the Ohio Innocence Project, traveling around the state speaking to law students. He told Blackwell something Blackwell never forgot. He said, "The worst thing about being inside for 39 years was not the violence, and not the food, and not the loneliness. It was the slow, daily realization that the world outside is still turning, and that nobody owes you a single minute of the time you missed." He said, "When I came out, I went to my mother's grave, and I sat there, and I tried to give her back all the Sundays we should have had. But you cannot give back Sundays. They are gone. They belong to the years that ate them." He married a woman named Maggie 1 year after his release. She had been writing him letters in prison since the late 80s. They had never met in person until he walked out. He says she is the entire reason he is still standing. He says the only thing he ever wanted was a quiet kitchen with a woman in it and a coffee pot that worked. He has that now. He says it is more than enough. The state of Ohio paid him approximately $1 million in compensation for 39 years. He used part of it to pay for Wiley Bridgman's funeral. When Wiley died of a stroke in 2017, 2 years after walking out himself, Wiley had been free for less than 5 years. The years inside had eaten his heart. Ricky Jackson buried him. Eddie Vernon, the recanted witness, lives in Cleveland still. He is in his 60s now. He goes to church every Sunday. He says he prays for Ricky Jackson every single morning. He says he will pray for him until the day he dies. Ricky Jackson has forgiven him, out loud, publicly. He says that boy was 12 years old. He was a child. The men who put words in his mouth were not children. Forgive the boy. Hold the men accountable. But the men are not held accountable. The detectives in the Jackson case were never charged. They retired with full pensions. They died of natural causes in nice Cleveland suburbs. The system that let them put words in a child's mouth in 1975 is the same system that did it to Lamont McIntyre 19 years later in Kansas City. We will get there. Hold the thread. That is Ricky Jackson. That is 2. Kevin Strickland never walked out of prison. He rolled out in a wheelchair. He was 62 years old. He had a bad heart. His left leg dragged. His hands shook. He had spent 43 years inside a Missouri Department of Corrections facility for a triple homicide that, according to the only surviving eyewitness, he was never anywhere near. His story starts on April 25, 1978, a Tuesday, Kansas City, Missouri. 3 people were attacked in a small house on South Benton Avenue. A young woman named Cynthia Douglas survived. She was wounded, but alive. She was rushed to the hospital. While she was on the gurney, a Kansas City detective asked her if she could name the attackers. She named 2 men. Neither of them Kevin Strickland. She knew Strickland. He had been at the same house earlier that evening. They were friends. He had left long before the attack. She knew that. She told the detectives that. But the detectives kept pushing. They needed a third name. There were 3 attackers. Cynthia Douglas had named 2. Under pressure, exhausted, in pain, with a bullet wound being treated, she said the name Kevin. The detectives wrote it down. They built a photo lineup. They put Kevin Strickland's picture in front of her. She nodded. She signed. The trial was in 1979. The first trial ended in a hung jury, 11-1, with the lone holdout being the only black juror, who said the case did not add up. The state retried Strickland with an all-white jury, and that jury convicted in under 4 hours. He was sentenced to 50 years without parole. Within months, Cynthia Douglas began to feel the weight of what she had said. She knew it was wrong. She had known it was wrong while she was saying it. By 1989, 10 years after the conviction, she began contacting the Midwest Innocence Project. She told them in her own handwriting that she had identified the wrong man. She wrote to the prosecutors. She wrote to the police. She wrote to the parole board. She wrote to the governor. For the next 30 years, Cynthia Douglas, the only surviving witness in the case against Kevin Strickland, pleaded with the state of Missouri to let him go. The state of Missouri did not let him go. Cynthia Douglas died in 2015. She died still trying. Her last message about the case was an email to a friend that said, "I just want him out before I am gone." She did not get her wish. He stayed inside for 6 more years. Inside, Kevin Strickland was, by every account from every guard and every fellow prisoner, the gentlest man on the block. He read constantly. He played chess. He never had a single disciplinary write-up in over 4 decades. He was, in the warped language of the Missouri prison system, a model inmate. He kept his cell spotless. He folded his sheets in military corners every morning. even though he had never been in the military, because order was the only thing he could control. He told a journalist once, "The day order goes, I go." In 2020, the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, under a new prosecutor named Jean Peters Baker, reopened the case. They reviewed everything. They read Cynthia Douglas's letters. They re-interviewed witnesses. They went back to the original detectives. They concluded, formally, that Kevin Strickland was innocent. Jean Peters Baker, a sitting county prosecutor, went on national television and said, "This man is innocent, and he must be released." The state of Missouri said no. Listen to that again. The county prosecutor, who has the actual authority to bring or drop cases, said the man was innocent. The state attorney general, Eric Schmidt, said the man would stay in prison. Schmidt argued in court filings that the conviction was final, that finality mattered more than guilt or innocence, and that Kevin Strickland's claims should be denied as a matter of procedure. He said this in writing. He filed it in court. Tricia Bushnell, the executive director of the Midwest Innocence Project, fought him for over a year. She filed motion after motion. She held press conferences. She walked into rooms full of cameras and said, "The state of Missouri is keeping a 62-year-old innocent man in prison because of paperwork." On November 23, 2021, a special judge in Jackson County, Missouri, ruled that Kevin Strickland was, beyond a doubt, innocent. The judge ordered his immediate release. Strickland was wheeled out of Western Missouri Correctional Center the same day. He was 62. He had been inside for 43 years. He left with one cardboard box. Inside the box were a Bible, 3 legal folders, a chess set, and a photograph of his mother. His mother had died while he was inside. He had not been allowed to attend her funeral. Now here's what you need to understand. The state of Missouri, having kept him inside for 43 years for a crime he did not commit, owed him absolutely nothing in compensation. Missouri's wrongful conviction statute, at the time of his release, only paid compensation to people exonerated through DNA evidence. Strickland's case did not involve DNA. It involved a recanted eyewitness, so under Missouri law, he qualified for $0. Zero. After 43 years. A GoFundMe was started by strangers within 48 hours of his release. It raised over $1,700,000. Strangers, people who had never met him. They sent him $5, $10, $50. A trucker in Texas sent $2,000. A second-grade class in Wisconsin held a bake sale and sent the proceeds. That is how Kevin Strickland was paid for the 4 decades the state of Missouri had stolen from him, by strangers and second-graders. He bought a small house in Kansas City. He filled the kitchen with plants. He told an interviewer that he wanted to learn how to garden. He said his mother used to grow tomatoes in the backyard when he was a child, and he wanted to grow tomatoes again. Because tomatoes meant home. He said the smell of a tomato vine in July was the smell of 1965, and he had not smelled it in 56 years. Blackwell did not get to meet Kevin Strickland. He had planned to. He had a trip booked to Kansas City for January of 2023. He was going to drive over from a different interview, the Lamont McIntyre case, and sit down with Strickland for an afternoon. But on December 15th, 2022, Kevin Strickland died of natural causes. He had been free for 1 year and 22 days, 387 days. That is what Missouri gave him back. After taking 43 years, the state of Missouri allowed Kevin Strickland 387 days of life as a free man. His funeral was small. His friends from inside, the men who had walked out before him, came. Tricia Bushnell came. Jean Peters Baker came. She sat in the back of the church with her hands folded, and she cried. She had spent 2 years trying to free him. She got him 387 days. She told a reporter outside the church, 387 days is not a victory. It is a receipt. It is the receipt the state of Missouri handed me when I asked for a man's life back. That is Kevin Strickland. That is 3. Archie Williams was 22 years old and stocking shelves at a grocery store on Government Street in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when his life ended. The date was December 9, 1982. A woman in a wealthy section of Baton Rouge was attacked in her own home. She was a white woman. The attacker was black. The attacker fled. The next morning, the Baton Rouge police pulled together a photo lineup. Archie Williams was in it because he had a minor arrest from when he was a teenager. The victim, traumatized, in shock, picked his face. She picked it because his face was in the lineup. She was wrong. She would later say she was wrong, but that morning, she pointed. Archie Williams was arrested at the grocery store. He was working a register. He looked at the officers and said, "I have not done anything." They told him to come quietly. He did. He thought it was a mistake. He thought it would be cleared up by the end of the day. By the end of the day, he was in East Baton Rouge Parish Prison, charged with attempted murder, aggravated rape, and aggravated burglary. He had never been to that neighborhood. He did not know that woman. He had been at the grocery store all morning, in front of a half-dozen coworkers, in front of customers, on a register that printed time-stamped receipts. His public defender did not call a single one of those coworkers. His public defender did not subpoena the receipts. His public defender showed up to trial in 1983 with a thin folder and no witnesses. The all-white jury convicted in under 30 minutes. The judge sentenced Archie Williams to life without parole, plus 80 years on top of it, to be served consecutively. They sent him to the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. You need to understand what Angola was in 1983. Angola is an 18,000-acre former plantation along the Mississippi River. It is, to this day, the largest maximum security prison in the United States. In the 1980s, it was almost entirely black men working the same fields, planting and harvesting the same cotton and sugarcane as the enslaved people who had worked that ground a century and a half before them. The men were paid 2 cents an hour. They worked under the eye of armed guards on horseback. They went out at dawn. They came back at dusk. If you refused to work, you were put in a cell called the dungeon, with no light, for as long as the warden decided. Archie Williams was sent to Angola. He worked the fields for the first 10 years of his sentence. He woke up at 4:30 in the morning. He ate a biscuit. He walked out into the cane. He worked until noon. He ate another biscuit. He worked until dusk. He came back. He slept. He did this 6 days a week for 10 years. On Sundays, he went to the prison chapel. He sang in the chapel choir. He had a beautiful tenor voice. The other men called him Songbird. In 1995, 12 years into his sentence, Williams's lawyers filed a motion for DNA testing. The state had collected a sheet from the crime scene with biological material on it. The lawyers wanted that material tested against Williams. Louisiana refused. They said the testing was not necessary. The conviction was final. They said the same thing Missouri said about Kevin Strickland. Finality. Finality, finality, finality. As if the word itself were a wall. The Innocence Project picked up the case. A lawyer named Vanessa Potkin took it on. She fought Louisiana for the next 23 years. 23 years. To get a single piece of DNA evidence tested. Every motion, the state opposed. Every appeal, the state opposed. Every hearing, the state opposed. The material sat in an evidence locker in Baton Rouge for over 2 decades, while a man sat in Angola for a crime he did not commit. In 2018, finally, after pressure from a federal court, Louisiana agreed to run the DNA against the FBI's national database. The result came back in days. The DNA on the sheet matched a serial offender named Stephen Forbes. Stephen Forbes had already been convicted of multiple sexual assaults in the same Baton Rouge neighborhood in the early 1980s. He had died in prison in 1996. So the DNA had matched, for 2 decades, a man who was already in the FBI database. If anyone had bothered to run it, they had not bothered. But it gets worse. Vanessa Potkin pulled the original case files. Inside the file, dated 1995, was a memo. The memo indicated that the prosecutor at the time had been informed that the biological material on the sheet did not match Archie Williams. The state had known in 1995 that Archie Williams was almost certainly innocent. They had buried the memo. They had let him sit in Angola for another 24 years. On March 21, 2019, Archie Williams walked out of the 19th Judicial District Courtroom in Baton Rouge. He had been inside for 36 years and 103 days. He was 58 years old. His mother had died while he was inside. His father had died while he was inside. His twin sister had died while he was inside. He came out to no one. His first meal as a free man was a cheeseburger from a Baton Rouge diner. He sat in the booth. He cried while he ate it. The waitress refused to charge him. 2 months after his release, Archie Williams did something nobody expected. He auditioned for America's Got Talent. He walked out onto a stage in front of Simon Cowell and millions of viewers. He told them where he had been. He told them what had been done to him. And then he sang. He sang "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me," the Elton John song, and he sang it in a voice that 36 years in a Louisiana prison field had not been able to break. He got a standing ovation. The judges, including Cowell, were openly weeping. Simon Cowell sent him to the next round. Williams advanced to the semifinals. He did not win. The voting public picked someone else, but 17 million people watched him sing on that stage. 17 million. Many of them learned that night the name Archie Williams. Many of them learned that night what Louisiana had done. That was the year America found out about the buried memo in song form. Blackwell met Archie Williams in 2020 in a green room behind a community center in Baton Rouge, where Williams was about to give a speech. Williams was 59. He had on a navy blue suit. He was tying his tie in a small mirror. Blackwell asked him how he was. Williams turned and said, "I am alive. That is more than the people who put me away can say." Then he smiled, and the smile was so warm Blackwell did not know what to do with it. Williams said one thing to him that day Blackwell wrote down word for word and has carried with him ever since. He said, "The men who buried that memo were not monsters. That is the worst part. They were tired men with families and golf games and grandchildren they loved. They went home for 36 years to dinners I did not eat and birthdays I did not see, and they did not feel anything about it. They were not monsters. They were ordinary. That is the part you have to understand. The system does not require monsters to grind a man up. It only requires ordinary people who do not look at the pieces of paper on their desk." Archie Williams now works full-time for the Innocence Project of New Orleans. He travels, he speaks, he sings. The state of Louisiana paid him an initial compensation of approximately $330,000 under the state's wrongful conviction statute. For 36 years. He used some of it to bury his sister, whose grave he had never been able to visit while he was inside. The rest he is using to live, slowly, carefully, like a man who has finally been given back his own days. That is Archie Williams. That is 4. Glenn Simmons was 22 years old and living in Harvey, Louisiana, a small town across the river from New Orleans, when an Oklahoma City liquor store clerk was killed on December 30th, 1974. Glenn Simmons had never been to Oklahoma. He had never been in that liquor store. He had never met that clerk. He was, on the night of the killing, more than 450 miles away in Louisiana, with family who could account for every hour of his time. None of that mattered. What mattered was that a teenage girl named Belinda Brown had been wounded in the same incident. She had survived. She had been brought to the hospital with a serious head injury. Detectives in Oklahoma City showed her photo arrays in the days following the attack. She picked out, by various accounts, dozens of different men. Dozens. She picked Glenn Simmons. She picked another young man named Don Roberts. She picked men who could not possibly have been there. The detectives wrote down the pics they liked, the pics they did not like. 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 they did not write down. Glenn Simmons was arrested in Louisiana on an Oklahoma warrant in early 1975. He was extradited. He stood trial in Oklahoma County District Court in the summer of '75. The case number was CF 1975-1357. Read it for yourself. The trial transcript is public. Belinda Brown took the stand. She identified Glenn Simmons as one of 4 attackers. The defense brought witnesses from Louisiana who said Simmons had been with them on the night in question. The all-white jury did not believe the Louisiana witnesses. The jury convicted. Simmons was sentenced to die. His sentence was later commuted to life because of a separate Supreme Court ruling on Oklahoma's death penalty procedures. So he stayed inside. Not on death row, but inside. For decades. For decade after decade after decade. Listen to me. Glenn Simmons walked into the Oklahoma State Penitentiary at McAllister in 1975. Gerald Ford was president. Gasoline was 57 cents a gallon. The Vietnam War had just ended. He came out, in 2023, into a world with electric vehicles, cryptocurrency, and a former television host as a former president of the United States. 48 years. 48 years inside. He spent most of his time inside in a small cell. He read constantly. He filed his own appeals when his lawyers ran out of options. He wrote letters to anyone who would listen. He wrote to journalists. He wrote to professors. He wrote to politicians. He wrote to every Oklahoma governor who served between 1975 and 2020. None of them wrote back personally. Form letters from staffers, sometimes. Often nothing. In the early 2000s, an Oklahoma attorney named Joe Norwood took on the Simmons case pro bono. Norwood spent the next 19 years working on it. 19 years, without payment. He filed motions. He combed through old files. He found, eventually, a critical document. Belinda Brown, the surviving witness, had identified multiple other men in the original photo arrays. The defense had never been told this. It had been buried. It was a violation of the Brady Rule, the constitutional requirement that prosecutors disclose exculpatory evidence. It had been violated for nearly 50 years. Joe Norwood took that document into court. The state of Oklahoma fought him. Of course they did. They always do. But in 2023, Oklahoma County District Judge Amy Palumbo finally ruled that Glenn Simmons had been denied a fair trial and ordered a new one. The Oklahoma County District Attorney, Vicki Behenna, reviewed the case. She concluded that the state could not retry. The witness was long dead. The evidence was decades stale. And the Brady violation was so egregious that no reasonable jury could convict. On July 21, 2023, Glenn Simmons was released from custody on bond. On December 19, 2023, Judge Palumbo formally declared him innocent. 48 years, 273 days, the longest wrongful imprisonment in United States history, officially recognized by the National Registry of Exonerations. Blackwell met Glenn Simmons in January of 2024. Simmons had been free for 19 days when Blackwell drove out to a small apartment Simmons was staying in on the south side of Oklahoma City. The apartment was bare. There was a couch, a bed, a small kitchen table, and a microwave. That was almost everything. Simmons opened the door. He was 70 years old. He was thin. He had a soft white beard. He moved slowly because there was a tumor in his lungs that had not yet been diagnosed, but was already eating him from the inside. He invited Blackwell in. He made instant coffee in 2 styrofoam cups. He sat down at the small kitchen table. He looked across at Blackwell, and he said the line that Blackwell has not been able to forget for the rest of his life. He said, "I went in when Nixon was alive. I came out, and Nixon's grandchildren are old." Then he laughed, a small, dry laugh, and he sipped his coffee. He told Blackwell about the day he was released. He said he walked out of the courthouse and he did not know what to do with his hands. He said for 48 years his hands had always been told where to be, behind his back, on a counter, on his head, in his lap. Now they were just hanging at his sides, free, and he did not know what they were for. He said for the first 3 days outside, he kept folding his hands behind his back when he stood up. It was muscle memory, the muscle of 48 years. He told Blackwell about the food. He said the first thing he ate as a free man was a piece of fried catfish. He said it tasted exactly like 1975. He said catfish was the one thing the world had not changed. He said almost everything else had changed beyond recognition. The cars, the phones, the way people walked down the street looking down at their hands. He said he did not understand the small glowing rectangles at first. He said he watched people on the bus in Oklahoma City, and they were all hunched over these little screens, and he thought, where did they all go? The world is right here, and they are all somewhere else. He told Blackwell about the compensation. The state of Oklahoma's wrongful conviction statute caps payment at $175,000 total, regardless of how long you were inside. He had been inside for 48 years. The math came out to approximately $3,645 per stolen year, less than $10 a day. For the worst loss the state of Oklahoma could possibly have inflicted on a human being, short of putting him to death. $3,645 per year. Glenn Simmons, sitting at that kitchen table, smiled when he said the number. He said, I should be insulted. I should be furious. But I am too tired to be furious. And the money is not why I fought. I fought because I needed someone, somewhere, in a black robe to stand up and say out loud that I did not do it. They said it. That was the money. The check is just a receipt. Then he told Blackwell about the cancer. He had been having trouble breathing in the months before his release. He thought it was the prison air. After he got out, he went to a free clinic. They scanned his lungs. They found stage 4 cancer. Stage 4. Not treatable. Manageable, maybe, with chemotherapy, for a window of months. He told Blackwell this calmly. He said, I have been dying since 1975. The state of Oklahoma made sure of that. They just put a name on it now. Blackwell did not know what to say. He sat at that small table in that bare apartment and he watched a 70-year-old man drink instant coffee out of a styrofoam cup and explain that he was free, finally, and dying, finally, and he had made his peace with both. Simmons reached across the table and put his hand on Blackwell's wrist. He said, Do not be sad for me. Be loud for the next one. There is always a next one. Be loud. Glenn Simmons died in November of 2024. He had been free for 16 months. The state of Oklahoma issued a brief statement of regret. The check was processed and delivered to his estate, which mostly consisted of a few books, a couch, a kitchen table, and the microwave. He was buried in Harvey, Louisiana, in the small cemetery where his mother had been buried decades before. On his headstone, his family had carved a single line, "Free at last." The line, of course, is from Dr. King, but it lands differently when you read it on the grave of a man who walked into prison while Nixon was alive and came out as Nixon's grandchildren reached middle age. That is Glenn Simmons. That is 5. One left, the worst of them, the one with the detective. Lamonte McIntyre was 17 years old. 17. Take a moment. Picture a 17-year-old you know, a nephew, a son, a neighbor, a kid in a hoodie at a bus stop. That is Lamonte McIntyre on the morning of April 15th, 1994, in Kansas City, Kansas. He was at home. He was a high school junior. He had no criminal record. None. Not a single arrest, not a single citation, not even a parking ticket because he did not own a car. He lived with his mother, Rose McIntyre, and his twin brother. He was, by every objective measure, a kid. That morning, in a different part of Kansas City, Kansas, 2 men were attacked in a parked car on Hutchings Street. They were killed. The shooter fled. There were witnesses on the street, none of them named Lamonte McIntyre. None of them had ever seen Lamonte McIntyre. None of them had any idea who Lamonte McIntyre was. Within hours of the killings, a Kansas City, Kansas detective named Roger Golubski arrived at the scene. Remember that name, Roger Golubski, Rogulbski. We will return to it repeatedly. He was, in 1994, a veteran detective. He had been on the force for almost 2 decades. He was known throughout the predominantly black neighborhoods on the east side of Kansas City, Kansas, as a man to fear. He moved through those neighborhoods like a feudal lord. He knew everyone. He had something on everyone. He used that something. Golubski, for years, according to dozens of women who would later come forward, had been preying on black women in Kansas City, Kansas, particularly women with relatives in the prison system or with outstanding warrants. He would offer leniency for relatives in exchange for sexual contact. He would threaten arrests if women refused. He would show up at their homes. He would corner them in cars. This was not 1 or 2 incidents. According to court filings and federal indictments later unsealed in 2022, the pattern stretched back to the 1980s and involved at least 70 women. One of those women was a Kansas City woman named Nico Quinn. Another was a woman named Stacy Quinn. They were related. They lived in the neighborhood where the Hutchings Street killings had happened. After the killings, Golubski showed up at their door. He told them he needed a name. He told them they needed to give him a name or there would be problems. Stacy Quinn, terrified, said she had seen a young man near the scene. She did not know his name. She gave a description. Golubski showed her a photograph of Lamonte McIntyre. She said, "That could be him." She would later testify that she had no idea who the kid in the photo was. She had never seen him. She picked the photo because Golubski wanted her to pick a photo. That was the case. That was it. A teenager with no connection to the victims, no motive, no criminal history, no physical evidence, identified by a witness who later said she had been pressured by a detective with a long history of pressuring black women. Lamonte McIntyre was arrested at his mother's home on the day of the killings. He was tried within months. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. He was 17 years old. His mother, Rose McIntyre, did not stop fighting from that day forward. Not for 1 day, not for 1 hour. Rose McIntyre, who worked 2 jobs to feed her sons, started writing letters from the moment her son was taken. She wrote to lawyers, she wrote to journalists, she wrote to civil rights organizations. She wrote to anyone whose name she could find in a phone book or a newspaper. She wrote in pencil because pens were expensive. She wrote on the backs of grocery store receipts when she ran out of paper. For 23 years, Rose McIntyre wrote letters. Inside, Lamonte McIntyre held on. He had been a quiet kid. He stayed quiet in prison. He worked the jobs they gave him. He read. He waited. He kept telling himself that someone, somewhere, would eventually look at the file and see what was obviously there. Nobody was looking. Nobody was looking for a long, long time. In 2014, 20 years into his sentence, a journalist at the Kansas City Star named Mike Hendricks got a tip. Someone, somewhere, had whispered the name Roger Golubski to him in connection with multiple wrongful conviction cases on the east side of Kansas City, Kansas. Hendricks started pulling files. He started knocking on doors. He found Nico Quinn. He found Stacy Quinn. He found other women. He started hearing the same name over and over in case after case after case. Roger Golubski. Roger Golubski. Roger Golubski. He found that Golubski's name was attached as the lead investigator or a key witness to dozens of convictions in Wyandotte County, Kansas, going back to the 1980s. He started looking at those cases one by one. He started seeing a pattern. Black men, almost always young black men. Almost always with one shaky witness whose testimony had been arranged by Golubski. almost always with women in their family who had had unsettling encounters with Golubski. Hendricks published a series of investigative articles in the Kansas City Star starting in 2017. The articles named names, they quoted women, they quoted families. They named Lamont McIntyre as one of the most likely innocent men in the entire Roger Golubski portfolio. Within months of those articles, the Midwest Innocence Project and a private firm took up the McIntyre case. Nico Quinn and Stacy Quinn agreed to testify under oath about what Golubski had done in 1994. Other witnesses came forward. The case against Lamont McIntyre, never strong to begin with, collapsed completely. On October 13, 2017, Lamont McIntyre walked out of the Lansing Correctional Facility in Kansas. He had been inside for 23 years and 181 days. He was 40 years old. He had walked in at 17. He had missed his entire 20s. He had missed his entire 30s. He had missed every single thing a young man is supposed to do. He had missed it because of one detective. Rose McIntyre was waiting for him at the gate. She had not stopped writing letters for 23 years. She was 63 years old. She had developed health problems from the years of stress. She wrapped her arms around her son, and they stood there at the gate, and they did not let go of each other for almost 10 minutes. There is a photograph of that moment. You can find it. Look at it. Look at her face. In 2022, Lamont McIntyre and his mother Rose filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the unified government of Wyandotte County and the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. The case was settled for $12.5 million, the largest such settlement in Kansas state history. $12.5 million for 23 years. That comes out to approximately $540,000 per stolen year. Higher than most of the men in this video. Still nothing close to enough. But a number, a real number, acknowledged, paid. Now we get to Roger Golubski. After the McIntyre case collapsed, after the Kansas City Star articles, after the federal lawsuit, the United States Department of Justice opened a federal investigation into Roger Golubski. They interviewed dozens of women. They interviewed dozens of men who had been convicted on his testimony. They opened additional wrongful conviction reviews. By 2022, they had enough. The Department of Justice indicted Roger Golubski on multiple federal civil rights charges. He was charged with using his badge to systematically violate the constitutional rights of women in Kansas City, Kansas, by sexually coercing them under threat of arrest. The indictment unsealed in late 2022 named multiple specific victims spanning multiple decades. His federal trial was scheduled to begin on December 19, 2024. Mark that date in your head, December 19, 2024. Exactly 1 year to the day after Glenn Simmons had been formally declared innocent in Oklahoma. Same date, different state, same kind of injustice. One man being declared free of a lie, another man being called to account for a lifetime of telling them. On the morning of December 19, 2024, Roger Golubski was found at his home in Edwardsville, Kansas. He had taken his own life. He was 71 years old. He had been on the Kansas City, Kansas police force for 35 years before retiring with a full pension. He had collected that pension for over a decade. He had never spent a single night in a jail cell. He had never sat in a courtroom and been forced to look at the women he had hurt or the men he had buried. He chose, on the morning he was finally going to be made to look at them, not to look. He stepped out on his own terms without ever facing them. The dozens of women who had spent years gathering the courage to testify against him gathered in Kansas City that day. They had been preparing to walk into a federal courthouse. They were not going to walk into anything now. There was no trial, there was no verdict, there was no sentencing. There was a closed file and a coroner's statement. One of the women, in a press conference outside the courthouse that afternoon, said this. She said, "He stole 40 years of my dignity. He stole 23 years of Lamont's life. he stole pieces of all of us. And on the day we were supposed to take some of it back, he stole the trial too. He stole our day in court. He took everything he could take, all the way to the end. Lamonte McIntyre, when asked by reporters about Golubski's death, was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I forgive him. Not for him, for me. I forgive him because I do not want him to live in my head 1 minute longer than he already has." Then he walked away. Blackwell met Lamonte McIntyre in March of 2023 in Kansas City in a small office where McIntyre worked then for a community organization helping recently released prisoners adjust to life outside. McIntyre was 45. He was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks. He had grown a small beard. He looked, more than anything else, tired. Not bitter, not angry, tired. Blackwell asked him the question Blackwell asked all of them. He asked, "What is the worst thing about the years inside?" McIntyre thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "The worst thing was knowing that my mother was outside writing letters. Knowing she was bent over the kitchen table at night with a pencil and a piece of paper. Year after year, writing to people who would never write back. The worst thing inside was knowing how hard she was working outside. Because nothing I could do, nothing I could feel in that cell could match what she was doing. She was the one really serving the sentence. She was the one carrying it all." Then McIntyre said something else Blackwell wrote down. He said, "The system that put me away is not broken. People keep using that word, broken. It is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. It was built to grind up boys like me. The detectives, the prosecutors, the judges, the juries, the appeals courts, the parole boards, the governor's office, the legislature. They are gears. They are turning. They turned for me. They are turning right now for someone else." The question is not, how do we fix the broken thing? The question is, how do we stop the working thing from doing its work? That is Lamonte McIntyre. That is six men. Anthony Ray Hinton, Ricky Jackson, Kevin Strickland, Archie Williams, Glenn Simmons, Lamont McIntyre. 219 years between them. 219 years of birthdays, weddings, funerals, sunrises, dinners, walks, mornings, evenings, years that were taken from them by the United States of America and given back, when they were given back at all, in the form of a small check and a press conference. Let us do the math one more time. Anthony Ray Hinton, 30 years. Ricky Jackson, 39 years. Kevin Strickland, 43 years. Archie Williams, 36 years. Glenn Simmons, 48 years. Lamont McIntyre, 23 years. Add it, 219 years. 219 years of human life. That is roughly the entire span of a country, if you count from the United States Constitution to right now. The entire arc of America, lived out in stolen pieces by 6 innocent men inside concrete rooms. And those are 6. 6 men. 6. The National Registry of Exonerations, as of the date this script is being written, has documented over 3,500 individual exonerations in the United States since 1989. 3,500. The total years lost across those exonerees? More than 31,000 years. 31,000 years of human life lost and acknowledged. And those are only the ones who got out. Those are only the ones who had a Brian Stevenson, a Vanessa Potkin, a Trisha Bushnell, a Joe Norwood, a Mike Hendricks, a Rose McIntyre. The vast majority of innocent prisoners in this country do not have any of those things. They will die inside. The doors will not open for them. They will never be names. They will be numbers. They will be statistics that nobody publishes because the publishing requires somebody to look. Now here is what nobody wants to say out loud. The detectives in the Hinton case were never charged. The detectives in the Jackson case were never charged. The detectives in the Strickland case were never charged. The prosecutor who buried the Williams memo was never charged. The detectives in the Simmons case were never charged. Roger Golubsky, the only one who came close to being held accountable, took his own life rather than be held accountable. In every single one of these 6 cases, the men who put these innocent men inside walked away with their pensions, walked away with their houses, walked away with their grandchildren on their knees. They retired. They golfed. They died of old age at home in bed, surrounded by people who loved them. The men whose lives they ate were either in cells or in graves while they did all that. This is not an accident. This is not an unfortunate side effect. This is the design. The design rewards the conviction. The design protects the conviction. The design treats the conviction, in the language of every state attorney general we have heard from in this story, as final. Finality. Finality is the magic word the system uses to mean we will not look, we will not check, we will not retest, we will not review. We have a number on a sheet, and the number is closed, and that is enough. The only thing that breaks finality is outside pressure. The Innocence Project, the Equal Justice Initiative, the Midwest Innocence Project, the Ohio Innocence Project, investigative journalists at struggling newspapers like the Cleveland Scene and the Kansas City Star, lawyers working pro bono for 19 years like Joe Norwood, mothers writing letters in pencil for 23 years like Rose McIntyre, witnesses like Eddie Vernon and Cynthia Douglas, who, sometimes after decades, sit down in front of a courtroom and choose, finally, to speak the truth and let the consequences fall where they fall. Without those people, none of these 6 men come out. Anthony Ray Hinton dies on death row. Ricky Jackson dies in a Cuyahoga County cell. Kevin Strickland dies inside Western Missouri Correctional, never knowing what tomatoes smell like, in July of 2022. Archie Williams dies in the cane fields at Angola. Glenn Simmons dies in Oklahoma at McAllister. Lamonte McIntyre is in his 50s right now, somewhere in Lansing, Kansas, still waking up at 4:30 in the morning, still waiting for someone to read his mother's letters. Without those people, the system does not self-correct. Let me say that again. Without outside pressure, the American criminal justice system does not, on its own initiative, find and release innocent prisoners. It does not. It will not. Every single one of these 6 men is out today because someone outside the system made the system act. And every single innocent prisoner still inside today is still inside because that pressure has not yet reached them. Now you understand why Blackwell does this. You understand why he sat across a kitchen table from Glenn Simmons drinking instant coffee out of a styrofoam cup. You understand why he drove to Birmingham to eat at a diner with Anthony Ray Hinton and watch him stir his coffee in 3 slow circles. You understand why he sat in a green room in Baton Rouge and listened to Archie Williams tie his tie and say, "The men who buried that memo were not monsters. They were ordinary." You understand why he sat in a small office in Kansas City and listened to Lamonte McIntyre say, "The system is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was built to do." You understand why Blackwell, every time he gets a tip, every time he gets a letter, every time he gets a name from a public defender or a prison chaplain or a mother in pencil on the back of a grocery store receipt, he picks up his bag and he goes. He goes because the system does not go. He goes because if he does not, and somebody else does not, the door does not open. He goes because 219 years is what these 6 men paid. And somewhere, right now, there is a 7th, and an 8th, and a 9th. And they are paying too. And they are paying every day. and they will pay every day until somebody walks into the room and reads the file. Let us go back, before we close, to the moments. The small ones. The ones the cameras missed. Because the cameras almost always miss the part that matters most. The moment Anthony Ray Hinton knelt on the gravel outside Holman Prison and put his palms flat on the ground because he needed to feel something that was not concrete. The moment Ricky Jackson, 57 years old, stepped onto the courthouse steps in Cleveland in November of 2014 and refused his lawyer's arm because he wanted to walk on his own 2 feet for the first time in 39 years. The moment Kevin Strickland was wheeled out of a Missouri prison in November of 2021 with a single cardboard box on his lap, a Bible, 3 legal folders, a chess set, a photograph of his mother. 387 days of life left to live. The moment Archie Williams sat in a Baton Rouge diner with a cheeseburger in front of him and cried while he ate it, the waitress refusing to charge him. The moment Glenn Simmons sat at a small kitchen table on the south side of Oklahoma City and laughed his small, dry laugh and said, "I went in when Nixon was alive." I came out and Nixon's grandchildren are old. The moment Lamonte McIntyre walked through a prison gate in Kansas in October of 2017 and his 63-year-old mother, who had written letters in pencil for 23 years, wrapped both arms around him and did not let go for 10 minutes. 6 moments, 6 doors that opened, 6 lives that the country had decided were over, that turned out, against everything the country had built to keep them shut, not to be over after all. And now, here is the hard part. Here is the part that Blackwell does not let himself look away from, no matter how tired he gets, no matter how many states he has driven across, no matter how many kitchen tables and styrofoam cups and tied ties and folded letters and cardboard boxes he has seen. Here is the part. Right now, as you are listening to this, in a cell in Texas, in a cell in Florida, in a cell in California, in a cell in Pennsylvania, in a cell in Georgia, in a cell in Illinois, in a cell in every state of the Union, there is a man or a woman who did not do what the state of America says they did. Their door is closed. Their letters are going unread. Their witnesses have not yet recanted. Their detectives have not yet been investigated. Their journalists have not yet been tipped. Their lawyers have not yet been assigned. Their mothers, if they still have mothers, are still writing in pencil on the backs of grocery store receipts. Their names are not on this list yet. They will be. Some of them will be. Most of them will not. Most of them will die where they are. The doors will not open in time. The lesson of Anthony Ray Hinton, the lesson of Ricky Jackson, the lesson of Kevin Strickland, the lesson of Archie Williams, the lesson of Glenn Simmons, the lesson of Lamonte McIntyre is the same lesson, and it is a hard one. The lesson is that justice in the country we live in is not automatic. It is not built in. It is not running in the background like an operating system, quietly correcting errors. It is the opposite of that. It is a slow, manual, exhausting human labor that has to be performed by hand by individual people over and over against active resistance from the very institutions that are supposed to provide it. The state of Alabama did not free Anthony Ray Hinton. Brian Stevenson freed Anthony Ray Hinton. The state of Ohio did not free Ricky Jackson. Kyle Swenson and the Ohio Innocence Project freed Ricky Jackson. The state of Missouri did not free Kevin Strickland. Tricia Bushnell and Jean Peters Baker freed Kevin Strickland, and the state of Missouri fought them every step of the way. The state of Louisiana did not free Archie Williams. The Nesapotkin freed Archie Williams after 23 years of being told no. The state of Oklahoma did not free Glenn Simmons. Joe Norwood, working without payment for 19 years, freed Glenn Simmons. The state of Kansas did not free Lamonte McIntyre. Rose McIntyre freed Lamonte McIntyre with a pencil on the backs of grocery store receipts for 23 years. That is the architecture. That is the actual architecture of how the innocent come home in this country. Not the courts, not the law, not the system. Individual human beings on the outside refusing to stop until the door opens. That is it. That is the only mechanism that works. Which means, and this is the last thing Blackwell wants to leave you with, the question of justice in America is not a question for the courts. It is a question for you, for the person who reads the article, for the person who hears the tip, for the person who finds the file, for the person who sends the $5 GoFundMe donation, for the person who writes the letter to the prosecutor's office. For the person who watches a man named Archie Williams sing on a stage on America's Got Talent and decides, after the song is over, to look up what was done to him and to never forget what was done to him. The system will not act. The system has demonstrated, in case after case, in decade after decade, that it will not act. The system requires you to act. That is the bargain. That is the brutal, ugly, true bargain at the heart of American justice. The country will only be as just as the people in the country are willing to drag it into being. Anthony Ray Hinton said it best, sitting in that diner in Birmingham, stirring his coffee in 3 slow circles before tapping the spoon on the rim. He said, "I am not free yet. Not really. Because somewhere in Alabama right now, in another 5x7 cell, there is another man like me. And until they let him out too, none of us are free." He is right. He is right about Alabama. He is right about Ohio. He is right about Missouri. He is right about Louisiana. He is right about Oklahoma. He is right about Kansas. He is right about every state of the Union. He is right about the country. There is another man like him, right now, tonight, as you are watching this. There is another man like Ricky Jackson. There is another man like Kevin Strickland. There is another man like Archie Williams. There is another man like Glenn Simmons. There is another man like Lamonte McIntyre. They are sitting on steel bunks in concrete rooms, and they are waiting. They are waiting for someone outside to look at the file. They are waiting for someone outside to read the witness statements. They are waiting for someone outside to find the buried memo. They are waiting for someone outside to send the letter, make the call, write the article, take the case, raise the money, ask the question, refuse the number. They are waiting for you. 6 men, 219 stolen years, 1 country, 1 detective in 3 of the cases who took his own life rather than face the women he had hurt. 1 mother with a pencil who wrote for 23 years. 1 lawyer who worked 19 years without payment. 1 journalist who pulled 1 thread until the wall came down. 6 men out. The door behind them still hanging open. Somebody else has to walk through it. Blackwell has driven home from those interviews more times than he can count. From Birmingham, from Cleveland, from Kansas City, from Baton Rouge, from Oklahoma City, from the small towns where these men were born and the small towns where they tried to build new lives. Every drive home is the same. He plays the recordings back in the car. He listens to their voices. He listens to the small, dry laugh of Glenn Simmons. He listens to the 3 slow circles of Anthony Ray Hinton's spoon. He listens to Ricky Jackson saying, "You cannot give back Sundays. They are gone. They belong to the years that ate them." He listens, and he drives, and the road in front of him is dark, and somewhere behind him, in his rear view, the country he was born in keeps doing what it does, keeps grinding, keeps closing files, keeps protecting finality, keeps refusing to look. And somewhere ahead of him, in a town he has not been to yet, on a street he has never driven down, there is another door. There is always another door. And on the other side of that door, there is a man, or a woman, who did not do what the state says they did, who has been waiting, sometimes for decades, for someone, anyone, to come and read the file. He turns the wheel. He drives toward it. The road keeps going. The door is still open. The door is still open. The door is still open.